Nyerere told the Americans and the Europeans at one time that this Coca-Colarisation of democracy is a problem. You cannot sit in London, Paris, and Washington and tell us this is how you must behave. No.
I'm a king. Yes.
What we have in many African countries, not just Uganda, Kenya is perhaps worse because it is ethnic affiliation and corruption. So when you are in such an environment, you've got to work at it. And sometimes I think that we are very impatient. The life of a nation cannot be defined in 60 years. That is the reality. If you look at other nations, it has taken centuries. So if you want things to be fulfilled in your lifetime, you will be disappointed. I'm no longer in that space. I now hold the view that mine is to make my contribution. And once you've made your contribution, then ultimately something will happen. My good friend says that Uganda is at crossroads. Show me a country that is not at crossroads. Show me. All countries, all polities are at crossroads, but of a different kind. If you listen to the debates that are going on now in the United States of America, the Americans think that America is at crossroads. The Germans think that they are at crossroads. The British post-Brexit think they are at crossroads. In Spain now, they think they are at crossroads. In India, they think that they are at crossroads because of the Modi administration and the question of Hindus. So every nation at all times will always be at some kind of crossroad. The question is, how do you deal with your crossroad? Every marriage, for those who are married, is troubled. You see people coming to church holding hands. You think that this is a marriage made in heaven. But if they were to tell you the things that are happening behind the holding of hands, you would be shocked. You would go back to your own marriage. So I hold the view that we've got to grapple with those realities, and that is why I believe that ideas, ultimately political parties must have ideas. In Kenya, for example, you have vehicles for elections. In some you have 200 political. What does your political party stand for? On matters of education, on matters of health. And African political parties have not matured, in my view. The political parties after independence had some clarity in terms of how they wanted to run the nations. Of the surviving political parties to mean that those which are still in power, CCM can say that it is a party. CCM in Tanzania can claim that it is a party. Frelimo was beginning to be a party. MPLA in Angola is struggling to be a party. ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe was beginning to be a party, but I see that they are now on the wrong. NRA, NRM is struggling to be a party, but it must jettison the freedom-fighting credentials in order to let the capsule move into a political party domain. So that, in my view, is the kind of problem that we must continue with, and it is our duty to mediate this in a very specific way, and each country has their own history, which is unique, so that even when we talk democracy, Nyerere told the Americans and the Europeans at one time that this Coca-Colarisation of democracy is a problem. You cannot sit in London, Paris, and Washington and tell us this is how you must behave. No. You've got to have a Uganda that recognizes the Kabaka. How do you deal with it? And you are still a democracy that accept the Emori Mori, that accept the Bunyoro Kitara, the Toro. How do you ensure that they exist in an environment and yet you talk about democracy in that sense? If you ask the king of Eswatini, he'll say he's democratic. If you ask the king of Lesotho, he'll say he's democratic. So we also must ensure that we run away from this gridlock of definitions. But there is one bright definition that I think was given on an enlightened moment by Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, when he said, democracy is a government for the people and by the people. I think the people element must never be eliminated. Lastly, there is always the attempt in Africa to romanticize Africa through sometimes history which is apocryphal, and to look at Africa as if it were one. Africa is not one. Whenever somebody tells me there was civilization of Africa, was it Yoruba? Was it Igbo? Was it Wolof? Was it Ovambo? Was it of Mbundu? Africa has over 6,000 polities. The Dogon in Mali, the government governed themselves very differently from the Yoruba. And while I agree that there was interaction of civilizations which Anta Diop talks about, it is important to remind ourselves that when we talk about decolonization, I'm not just talking about decolonization, I'm talking about decoloniality. There are two distinct words. Decolonization is the act of merely jettisoning the physical infrastructure of decolonization. Decoloniality is emptying our minds. So we are now in the face of decoloniality. Africa must reinterrogate governance. And is in our reinterrogation of governance that we'll get something that is closest to our African situation in its very many nuanced forms. And lastly, about elections. I think we have a problem with elections. And I think that elections are part of our problem. I'm in a number of Ugandan forums and a number of African forums, and it pains me to no end when I see a young person putting a poster to be a member of parliament in Uganda in 2026. I see a young person or an old person in Kenya talking about elections in 2027. In African countries, you stop an election today and you begin campaigning for the next. There is never a time to think about the nation. In China, when I watch the Chinese sitting, the Politburo, the Chinese, you know what they are doing? They are thinking of how they will relate to China politically, economically, 100 years from when they were sitting. No wonder you find them. Yesterday we were in a Chinese restaurant. I was not in a Buganda restaurant. I was in a Chinese restaurant in Kampala. When I go to Nairobi, I'm in an Indian restaurant. They are thinking beyond elections. You and me, courtesy of our Western education, courtesy of our colonization of our minds, we were so thoroughly indoctrinated that even when we are doing the wrong thing, we do not know. We need prayer and fasting, which we are now become experts at, praying and fasting in the hope that things will happen. But it is decolonization and decoloniality. And once we do that, and I hope that this Katiba will help us. If you listen to me consistently, one of the most guardedly impatient persons talking about Africa and the need for change is me. And I'm consistent about this. When I suggest that we understand context, I'm now warning myself that my sense of urgency does not necessarily represent the reality. And you gave examples of countries such as Argentina. Argentina started as a River Plate state in 1766. And as we speak today, we have seen the Peronist movement, we have seen the Kirchners, we have seen Carlos Menem, we have now seen Milei. It is work in progress. If you talk about Chile, we remember Allende, we remember Pinochet. It is work in progress. Nicaragua with the Ortegas. So when one talks about these things, one is simply saying, if you come with the intention that things are going to change, they never change as dramatically as you desire them to. I want to mention this. You talked about Haiti. Haiti has a problem that started in 1872, and the problem is manufactured externally by France, and we know, and the United States. You remember the president of Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who wanted to change Haiti. What did the Americans do to him? Right now, what is happening during the Duvaliers, Jean-Claude Duvalier, Papa Doc, and Baby Doc. So one looks at history and one sees that there is a sense, and I want to repeat this thing respectfully, my good friend Professor. When we talk about colonization, what we are saying is that the neo-colonizer is a reluctant person to depart. Look at organizations such as the Commonwealth of Nations. These are neo-colonial institutions. The La Francophonie. Look at what has happened in Burkina, in Niger, in Mali. It is France still trying to control our colonies. And as we speak now, in Cameroon, they have posted a former war general to midwife the departure of Paul Biya. So you may think that things have changed, but they have not changed. Here in Uganda, why are you under some kind of sanctions? In Zimbabwe, why are they under some kind of sanction? Because you are meant to be a satellite state. And that is the extent to which we still say that the colonizer has not quite left. But that does not immunize those of us who have been in power from the scrutiny that we are subjecting the leaders. Thank you very much. It cannot all be done in one day. Thank you.
I'm a king, yes, I'm a king. I'm a king.